There's plenty of options out there if you like your rank and flank mass fantasy battle games. A lot of people still just play their favourite edition of Warhammer. Then there's games like Kings of War, Mayhem and Oathmark. On this episode though, we'll find out a wee bit more about another choice that's available to you, and that's in the form of a game called Warpack. I'm joined by creator Joe Prince of Prince of Darkness Games, and I kicked off the chat by asking him a wee bit about the first time he played a game of Warhammer Fantasy Battles.
First time I ever played like a proper game of Warhammer Fantasy Battle was in the old Games Workshop in York, because I'd got into it, probably how most people got into it, like through Hero Quest. So I'd come, like, remember when it was like 1988 or 1989 when Hero Quest was advertised on TV. That was like the most amazing thing that you'd ever seen.
That was an advert, that Hero Quest ad,
yeah,
but amazing.
Yeah.
Probably on YouTube, isn't it? I'll have to look for it.
Yeah, it must be, yeah. That was on, because that was on like Primetime Kids TV, and so if there's someone who was kind of into fantasy stuff anyway, it was just like that was the must-have game. So it had that, and then because it was made by Games Workshop in conjunctions with Waddington's, then it led you to finding more of the Citadel miniatures range and stuff, and then from that I'd gone into Advanced Hero Quest, because they had that like card game shop, and from that I'd started collecting the Skaven because they were like the enemies in Advanced Hero Quest. So I started building up like a small Skaven collection, and then for my birthday, when I can't remember how old I must have been, maybe 13 or 12 or 13 or something, or 14, went to York, and then it was their gaming night, and like one of the guys upstairs just kind of said, "Oh, what models have you got?" and then helped me build like a little army and then play out this quick game. And that was that would have been using what we kind of call third edition now, like the Warhammer with the Warhammer armies, but it was a very different game from later editions.
So third, I always get these mixed up. Was third the High Elves and the Goblins? Is that right?
No, that was fourth. That was fourth edition.
When
they went,
right.
Fourth edition was like the first time they had the actual box set. Third edition, it kind of like the first three editions kind of meld into each other, and it was when the fantasy role play game wasn't really separated from the war game, so they both like had the same base book. But then there was like the armies, the Warhammer armies book was what we were using, and that just had like lists of all the different armies. You could have like every army book in one. That was really cool. I think my mate still got a copy of that somewhere. But it had everything. It had like your Slan and Pygmy armies and things, and Hobgoblin armies and stuff, and like rules for Cathay armies and things like that, alongside all the main ones like the Elves and Orcs and Dwarves and Empire and what have you. So
with the Games Workshop stuff, were you always inclined to the fantasy stuff? Did you ever do a bit of 40k, a bit of Space Marine, anything like that?
Always more towards the fantasy. I did play. I've always liked Space Hulk. Like that was like the game that I had as well. I had the first edition of that or the second edition. I think it was the first edition I had, like the one that had Gene Stealer and Deathwing as the expansions. I played that, but I didn't get into 40k as much. Like some of my mates who were playing it, they were into 40k a lot more. But like in the Rogue Trader era, I just kind of dabbled with it, never really got into it. And then the same was like the what we called Golden Eagle edition. And then third edition, when Tau came out, then I started getting into it a bit more and actually played 40k for a while. Then that was kind of like Tau were my army in a way. Like a lot of my mates already had the other armies claimed. I mean, like everyone had Marines, but everyone had like the other armies claimed. Like it was only Alan had Elder, so he couldn't get Elder or something. Or Ian would have the Imperial Guard, so you don't get the Guard. So I played it quite a lot. Third edition in the times of Rhino Rush, and then after that, not played 40k so much. But fantasy's kind of always been there on and off. So.
Were you playing Warhammer Fantasy actively when they destroyed the thing? And what was it, 2016, 15?
Yeah, I think it was 2015, 16, the end times. Yeah, I was. I was. That was a big blow. And it was a shame it's double-edged sword, because it was really like the end time stuff when they came out with Outline. They came out with all the new rules and new models and stuff and new fluff and stuff. That was really cool, because it's like, oh, Warhammer's finally being supported. It's got some really nice new models that we can add in, and these new lists and alternate ways of doing it. All the elves can fight together, and then they just blew up the world. So.
Before I get on to that, actually, I was going to ask about aesthetics and stuff, but I do, because our mutual friend, Colin Gray, you did the Dyson with Design podcast with him.
Yes, we did, yeah.
When I was listening back to them, and an episode that was like just about round this time, you've made a reasonable prediction that would happen. I don't know how available that information was at the time, but I remember you talking about the rumours that it might have been turning into like a skirmish game or stuff, and it kind of did, didn't it? So
yeah, they went with the round bases and moving away from blocks of units in formation. Yeah.
Were you devastated about that, or were you excited by it, or?
I was disappointed. I wasn't fully burning my army, devastated, torching the miniatures.
Because that happened, didn't it?
Yeah, that happened. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was disappointing. It was kind of end of an era, because like for the last few years we'd always made an effort of trying to go like once or twice a year to Nottingham to play in like the Battle Brothers tournament or the Warhammer Open tournament or something. And I was kind of like, well, we're not going to do this anymore. That's not going to happen. We're not going to travel, the pain in the arse journey to Nottingham and back from Scotland to play Age of Sigmar. And when Age of Sigmar first came out, it was such a mess as well. And my knee-jerk reaction was to not want to have anything to do with it, and so I didn't bother with it and didn't play it for a long time. And for a long time, it was, from what I've read, it was pretty much unplayable in that there was no structure as to how to actually build an army or get a game. It was just put whatever models you want on the table and then try and roll some dice, muddle through the Age of Sigmar rules. But
what did you think playing through Warhammer from when you started to when it was killed, if you like? What did you think of the way the aesthetic went? Because it went very grimdark. It went, the kind of humour in that was dissipated a lot, wasn't it? So it was a very dark sort of game when it finished.
From when I started playing, it had started off grimdark, because I kind of someone on other episode said, they turned it grimdark in 6th edition, but no, it had always been like the whole. When Warhammer World was created, it was supposed to be like a grimdark fantasy version as opposed to like Dungeons and Dragons, and then they kind of went back to that aesthetic, I think, in 6th edition. But yeah, the early stuff with like the Slaves to Darkness, and when you had Slam having lobotomized human slaves and things, and like the weird stuff that you could get on the Chaos Rewards table and stuff, it was pretty grimdark and weird from the get go. But
I guess I just sort of think, because my like entry point, it was the period of red everywhere, and the Kev Adams goblins and stuff.
Oh
and
yeah.
Everything just looked loads of fun. So, and when I looked at some of the later stuff, it still looked great. It was just there was a darker feel to it, a bit more serious. I think it kind of looks.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, like it was kind of like the 4th edition, 5th edition, where it was more. They did a lot of work on the goblins and the night goblins and squigs and things. I think put in like that was quite a lot of the humour and cartooniness came out there, I think. But then later on they did kind of want to swing back to the grimdark fantasy of like the poverty of the Bretonian peasants and things, like how awful it was in that feudal society, to get back to that balance with like the kind of wackiness of like the goblins and stuff, I guess.
So when the old world gets blown up, there's a vacuum for a mass fantasy battle rank and flank game. We got Kings of War. I'm not sure what year Kings of War came about.
I think that was kind of. I remember Kings of War was like one of the things that kind of spurred me on to start going with Warpack, and it was before the end of the old world, because Mantic had brought it out to kind of fill gaps in the Games Workshop's range for Warhammer. I think for a lot of the plastics and stuff when they first brought them out, like the elves and their undead and stuff, because they were both running for a while, for a couple of years, I think. Anyway.
Right, I didn't know that they coexisted for a while. Latterly, we've had Oathmark as well. I had Joe McCulloch on the podcast last episode. So Oathmark, you can play the big battles with that rule set as well. Another one I've come across, Mayhem. I don't know if you've heard the Brent Spivey he wrote a game called Rogue Planet.
That rings a bell. I've not heard about Mayhem.
I think Mayhem. I think it's designed to be smaller scale than 28mm. I think it's potentially 6 to 10mm. I think the idea is it's very, very mass battle. Like it's a big, huge epic battle. I need to have a closer look at it. So, and then you mentioned the ninth age as well. So
yeah, ninth age.
I don't know a lot about that. So is that just Warhammer fans that kind of kept it going, or that? Is that right?
Pretty much, or at least that's how it started. Like after, because 8th edition was the last edition of Warhammer, and then the old world blew up, and then so some of the fans who really liked the Warhammer system, created their own 9th age, and then I think it was quite linked to like the the ETC tournament scene. Like it's quite tournament focused now, 9th age, or it seems to be and stuff. Because although it's in their 2nd edition now, so I don't know if it's really 10th age. And I played a bit of 9th age. Went to a couple of tournaments, and like the 1st edition I thought was okay. It is very much like kind of trying to keep Warhammer and keep all the complexities and keep lots of the similarities, lots of the nostalgia of Warhammer. But trying to make it more balanced in a way, so it loses a lot of the wackiness and the characters. Like there's some of the weird army builds that you could do in Warhammer just don't exist in 9th age at all. They're not. That's not the direction they've taken with it. So.
Yeah, I need to give a shout out as well. Nathan Stone, another guest on the show, because those guys run the Warhammer Orchard, which I think is kind of the same idea, that that's a community that use, I think it's the favourite aspects of all the different editions, and they've just kind of created their own one and they embellish it a wee bit. And so I suppose there'll be a lot of that goes on.
There's a lot, and there's the whole Oldhammer scene as well of people. I think that's people pretty much using like a version of like 2nd edition, 3rd edition, but slightly tweaked. Yeah, going back to that old school.
And that brings us nicely to Warpack, which is a game that you created yourself, Joe. So how long has this been in the works? And I mean, you sent me a polished up rule set there, but have you been working on this a long time? Or?
It has been a long time. It has been a labour of love of a long time. Like I say, like kind of when the first time I played Kings of War was kind of what got me going and thinking, I could go back to that system that I'd tinkered with a bit and gone, no, there's something here I can build from. But now to finally get like a rule set that I'm kind of happy sharing and happy for people to play test, and that's more streamlined than the older versions and just much easier to get into. Yeah, I'm pleased with it. But I guess it must have been about 10 years or so I've been actually working on it on and off. So
I had a wee flick through it. I've not properly dived into it, but I had a flick through the rules that you sent me. You sent me that nice PDF which I printed out. So the thing that jumps out to me straight away that I need to ask you about, no dice. I can't see anything about dice in there. Is that right?
No dice, that's right, yes. It's a diceless game. It's all done with cards instead. The deck of playing cards that you use, that's the randomizers that you then assign to your units. So each unit has its effectiveness value based on the card for the turn. I did have like a modified version where I was using dice. Each unit using 2d6, but that wasn't. It didn't have the same strategic element of, because that's part of the strategy of the Warpack, of like assigning your action cards, and instead of rolling the dice when your unit makes the action, you get kind of all your randomized at the start of the turn and have to decide where to assign them. So it helps kind of mitigate against some of that bad luck, because you can try and sink some low cards on units that you think won't be involved in anything crucial.
So what do we need to play Warpack then? We've got a couple of armies, and those you talk in the book that's 28mm, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, does it? I mean, you could sort of adapt it to.
No, it doesn't have to be. That's kind of why I've written the ranges in like as abstract, instead of being linked to like inches or centimeters specifically. Everything's done in like an abstract unit of range, so you could scale it up to like really big models or scale it down to like 10 mil or something quite easily. But that said, I pretty much play at 28 mil. It's with all the old Warhammer favourites get thrown into the mix.
So talk us through a typical turn on it then. Like how might that work?
Yeah. So the turn's kind of broken down into like 4 main phases, and the first phase is getting your command cards. This is like assuming like we're partly through the game, we've already deployed and the units are on the field. And each player gets dealt first a number of command cards equal to the number of units they've got in their army. And then these are, you can use like a standard deck of playing cards. So they range, scores range from like an ace up to a king, although to kind of keep the numbers from skewing, I count kings and queens as 7s and jacks as 6s. So like a 10's your top card. And the 4 suits correspond to like different types of action. Melee attack or shooting or magic or defense. And if you've got the right suit to the right action, then the value doubles. It acts as a trump. And a trump ace will count as an 11 doubled, like giving you a 22. So that's like the best card you can get for that particular action. And then once you get dealt your hand of cards, and then you assign them secretly to your units on the field. So you know which units have got which cards, how effective they're going to be that turn, but your opponent doesn't until that unit reveals its card by making an attack, or has to reveal it to defend itself by coming under attack. And because of the way the trump suits work, you can have like it could be a hard choice as to whether you want to put a good defensive card on a unit or whether you really need them to get stuck in, even if it means they're going to be likely to take damage back.
Do we? If I'm playing you, do I have a complete deck of cards and you have a complete deck of cards? So
no, it's a shared deck. We just use one deck. It's a shared deck, and part of the timing of the game is when the deck runs out. That's when the end game triggers and stuff. So you don't have to worry about tracking which turn number you're on. You just look at the deck of cards as to like how much longer is left in the game, which means and obviously the more units you got, the quicker you'll run through it. So for bigger games, I say it's like the second or third time the deck's exhausted is when like the end game's triggered. But for a quick game where you've got like a quick skirmish battle, then it's just the first time the deck runs out that triggers the end game and means like the next turn will be the last turn.
What's it like in terms of like bookkeeping and keeping track of wounds and things like that? What's the sort of process there?
Yeah, I don't like it to be anything to be too complicated, so I've tried to keep it fairly simple. And that's kind of where the dice come in. Like, dice are really good wound markers and wound counters, so I tend to use them for that. But essentially, when a unit takes damage, you track the wounds that it's taken, and if it takes wounds in excess of the toughness of one of its models, then you take off that model. You take off as many models until you've matched the damage. So if you've got a unit of infantry, you've got a toughness of 3, and they take 6 damage, then you're taking off 2 models, and then you wouldn't have to mark any wounds on the unit. But if they took like 7 damage, then you take off 2 models and mark 1 wound on the unit for next time they get hit. So.
Were you quite intentional about doing the removal of units? Because again, when we go back to Kings of War, I know they've got a system of the unit is on the table and it can be multi-based because it's going to break or be killed, and that's the only point where it's going to be removed.
Yeah, I can see why they did that for Kings of War, and it does keep things nice and quick. But I did kind of like the aesthetic of like you've seen a unit dwindle, you've seen them like getting beaten down by the attrition as they're taking damage, and so essentially the models kind of are wound markers in a way. So it seemed. To me, it made sense to just use that aesthetic, and sometimes you start off with a huge horde unit, and then they've taken loads of damage, and then you're just down to like a few stragglers left. And I kind of like how that looks on the table as well. So.
How granular are you going in terms of a unit? Are we looking at like rank and file and maybe a champion at the front, or are all units or all models in the unit considered as equals, no matter what the model is?
It's just it's rank and file and champion. It's just a champion. That's the only. All models are equal, but you can buy champions for most units. So in which case, one model counts as a champion who gives like a buff to the whole unit. And here it's kind of like this in the same way. Sorry, like.
Can the champion be targeted to take him or her out first when you're removing casualties?
No, the champion's always the last to die. So you always, if you paid for a champion, you always get the benefit of that champion while that unit's still on the table.
Do the cards make their way onto the table, or are they kind of sitting with you at your side of the table?
It's kind of the player's choice. For me, I quite often like to put the cards on the table next to the units, but you've also got cards with the unit stats on, or an army list, and you can just put the action cards back with them, like off at the side, to keep things a bit neater. So it's kind of down to personal choice. Either way works, and sometimes it depends on the size of the cards and things. But
did you approach the game with like a design ethos, or was it more just a sense of working through and thinking what felt cool and playtesting and stuff like that?
I think I definitely did have an ethos. There's things that I liked and things that I wanted to avoid. And one of the big things I wanted to have was just have it like multiplayer, so you could have a 3-player or 4-player game. It wasn't limited to like just 1v1 or teams of one side against another. So that was something that was important. And the other thing is I wanted it to be like, the game's not over until you're actually playing it. I want it to be like, so armies, if you spend your points on an army, it's going to be roughly equivalent to another army of that point, that point level. Like there's not going to be, kind of traps for new players or something, whereas like some units are, massively underperform for their points cost. So like it kind of be balanced and to be decided more by gameplay on the table rather than being won in the list building phase or in the buying models phase for some. Yeah. What was
it like doing all the playtesting? Because you've sort of been working on it for a number of years. So, in the early days of doing the playtesting, were there quite big things that would come up that you needed to overcome? Or has the core of the game always kind of existed in the same form?
That's a good question. I think the core's kind of always been there in the same form, in that it's been you're dealing out the action cards to your units, but there were big changes that have been made, and I always wanted it to be quite simple and quite easy to pick up and play, and didn't want a huge tome of a rule book. So, but I've definitely stripped that back a lot and made it a lot easier. Made it a lot easier for people to just create their own armies, because in some of the older versions I had like a second book almost of how to design your faction. Like there was points that you could buy to unlock different types of units, and so your faction might have a speciality in kind of cavalry or something, and that's when I was still having the structure that a lot of games have, where you have to have a certain amount of core troops. There's like a core tax that you have to pay before you can get the more exciting ones and things like that. So I had that in the early versions, but I've kind of done away with that now and just left it more flexible, and just hope that different types of unit are costed so that they're reasonably balanced. But you never really know till it gets out in the wild. Like playtesting, it seemed okay, but it's part of the fun of the game, I guess, trying to solve it and find the optimal builds and things.
Who would you say was the main target audience for Warpack?
Originally I thought it was like people who were, fed up with Warhammer, or got kind of burnt by the old world ending and wanted to, carry on that wargaming approach. But more I'm thinking it's maybe a younger audience as well. It works well for bringing kids into wargaming, like who've maybe not played before. So that was what I noticed, because I was going to a few of the conventions and just setting up and just running demo games, and often it would be like the younger players who seemed, you know, really excited or liked the fantasy models and would get into it, and it's kind of seemed to flow simply enough and not be too overwhelming for them, that they would get into it and have a good time. So I found it's, and I'm playing it with my with my wee boy who's 9. We've played some Warpack, and I've played that with some of his friends, and they seem to enjoy it. So I think that that's kind of what I've learned just from running it, and just from running it out at conventions, that it actually it's a great war game for younger players or newer players, as well as us old cynical veterans.
How long does a game typically last then?
Again, it depends on the size, but like a quick skirmish game, I think if you could probably get done in about an hour if you know what you're doing. Maybe like an hour and a half if if it's playing out, taking a bit longer, or someone's first game. But up to, like, if you're having a big 30-point battle, then that's going to be like a whole afternoon, I reckon, to play that out. And yeah, again, depending on the number of players as well. The more players you add into the mix, it slows things down, adds a new element, that kind of meta game.
What's the state of play with its availability? Like, how would people get their hands on it going forward?
Yeah, well, going forward, that's what I've got to work on next, because I've just was just putting this draft together and to get to yourself and for my Patreon was like my last challenge. So at the moment, the only way to get it is to back my Patreon for a princely price of £2 a month. If you're on the lower tier, then it's already there, so you get access to that and be able to get the full version. But yeah, going forward, I want to make a kind of nicer looking and maybe a bit more user friendly version, adding in more bits, examples and things, and then get that out there. Still to be decided, but ultimately I'd like to kind of do a Kickstarter when I've got a bit more artwork put together and things like that, and get the availability out there. But we'll try and get like a bare bone versions out to a few wargaming clubs first and things like that, I think.
Have you done much in terms of world building, story worlds and stuff like that, or are you leaving that up to the players to, create their own story worlds and backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a good question, and my kind of preference is to leave it more up to the players. But that said, I have kind of in my head, I've got a fair bit of the story world. I had started typing up some of it. I've written up some of the background for the world that was going to accompany Warpack, or maybe it still will. But that was in a slightly different iteration. That's when I had all these factions. So I've still got all these storylines. There's different factions of like the Emerald Horde and the Norse dwarves and the Sea Elves and Sylvan Fae and things, and the Ulfenvar werewolf folk. So I've got all these the storylines in the world there somewhere, but it's not quite written up in a version to share. So that's still something for me to decide, like whether I want to include all that, or whether it's just about I like the players just creating their own worlds, and then the characters that you bring to your army, that you come up with, that you create, they have whatever significance you want in the world. Like they could be one of the main leaders or the head of a nation. You're not kind of constrained by playing second fiddle to Karl Franz or whoever else is out there. So.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, when I got the Kings of War rule set and saw that they'd built their world in it, but I just couldn't get into it. Couldn't get into their lore. I don't know what it was. A lot of folks say it's because they called the world Mantica. That maybe put people off, but I don't know. I just couldn't really play in that sandbox. I always found myself going back to the old Warhammer armies, and maybe it's just what you grow up with, I suppose. Are you using mainly Citadel miniatures? Do you use any other miniature range?
Mainly Citadel, but no, I've used lots of other things as well. I've got like a human Perry miniatures from like the Civil War era and stuff. So I use them as a human faction, and I've got some of the old Rackham werewolf models who are really cool. So it's really nice to use them. I've like this werewolf faction, and I use some hordes and some war machine models as well thrown in. So that's the nice thing about it being minis agnostic. You can just bring whatever and add it into a faction, mix it all together. Yeah, that's the other cool bit that I like.
I know that fantasy isn't a period, but how advanced can the technology get in the game? Like,
It's
can it
kind
go
of
black
up
powder?
to,
Can you get
yeah,
machine
black
guns?
powders. You can get kind of Gatling guns, a volley gun, and that's as advanced as it gets. They're like the Giselle long rifle and stuff. So it's like, yeah, black powder technology, but pretty basic, up to kind of like muskets and things. The part of like building your army in Warpack is you choose what technologies are available to them and stuff. So black powder is a choice that you can take, and if you take that, then it unlocks access to these advanced black powder weapons and engineering and stuff. So,
what would your big ambitions be for the game? Like, what would you really like to see happen in the future with it?
Yeah, I'd like to see it get picked up by lots of players and gaming clubs and things, people getting into it, and ultimately it'd be great to be doing some, like, I mean, maybe not even tournaments, but just like some weekend events or things, or some, have like some ongoing storylines. I've got like a campaign system that I've been working on for it as well, the Pretenders campaign system. So I'd get that out there and just it'd just be cool to hear about the like wargaming groups playing it and hearing like the stories of their campaigns and seeing what happens, what narratives come out of that. And like I said, I'd love to launch it on Kickstarter and get it out to as many groups as possible and get it played. It just always gives me a buzz when I hear like someone's played one of my games and they've had fun doing it. So.
What are some of your favourite miniature games?
Yeah, well, I think like Warhammer is obviously like the big one, and Advanced Hero Quest that I've already mentioned. Like they were the ones that I grew up with, and it's mostly Games Workshop stuff, I guess, for the miniatures games. Blood Bowl as well. I've always enjoyed Blood Bowl. Played a fair bit of that. Space Hulk's a good classic. Board game.
Survival horror. I had that for the Commodore 64, Space Hulk. I don't think it was very playable.
No, terrifying.
That was the case for lots of Commodore 64 games. I look back on it very nostalgically, but my wife once got me like a emulator console, and it was like the early 80s games on it, and I was like, I can't even play these.
Yeah.
You're ruining my childhood. But do you get much painting done these days? Do you do a lot of painting with your miniatures?
I'm doing pretty well these days. I've got like a painting area set up, so and I'm just it's nice that I've got to a point where I can just paint what I want to paint now and stuff. Whereas I suppose sometimes when it was the days of like going to the occasional tournament or things for Warhammer, I'd be like, okay, no, I need to get that unit done. I've written this list, so that's what I have to do and get that done. And it was good to have that deadline, but now it's a bit more chilled out. So I'm just working my way through lots of random models. I'm just finishing off my big conversion of like Thankwall Bone Ripper Hell Pit Abomination thing that's kind of been built again over many years and just finally actually got it painted. So, yeah.
Do you buy new Games Workshop models?
I still do occasionally, especially because, like I said, my wee boy is. I mean, he goes in and off it, but he'd got into Age of Sigmar recently, so I've been buying some stuff for him and then buying a few bits for myself. I did like the new like Cruel Boys models that they came out with, so I got the Dominion set just to get those models and because he likes the Stormcast, so he's painted up all the Stormcasts and done all them. So yeah, I got it for those guys. They're pretty cool. I've only painted the boss, and I need to build the rest of them. But
what do you think of the modern aesthetic of the Games Workshop stuff?
it's been kind of trying to make your peace with the scale creep. I think that's the thing that's just happened since I started collecting. Like the models have just got bigger and bigger, pretty much. I'm starting out from, I don't know whether it was supposed to be 25 mil when it started, but now it's like about 35 mil or something for your standard guys. And it's weird for the Age of Sigmar, because a lot of the models are quite like the concepts, because they've gone totally different with it, and some of them are really cool, like the Cahedron Overlord, Steampunk Dwarf guys. They've got some cool models. But at the same time, I miss the character of like the old like metal models from the 80s and stuff, and like the old like Jez Goodwin, Skaven, and Wood Elves and things. They're the ones that I really like and still have in my army. So yeah, I mean, some of it did get a bit too big and too like, you know, it was just like huge roided up orcs and things. So that's partly why I kind of quite like the Kruleboy, even though they're really tall models. They've kind of gone a bit back to like an older, like more of Lord of the Rings kind of aesthetic, like a bit more rangy, scraggly orcs instead of more looking like bodybuilders. So yeah, I quite liked that and stuff. But yeah, wish they could have just stuck with that from the outset instead of going through that whole making them the massive, especially because they didn't really seem to make sense with the stats that they were giving orcs as well. Same like 40k in fantasy, where they were still, you know, you had these huge hulking guys who were still only strength 3. Like, why?
Aye.
Yeah.
The some of the models they sell for Age of Sigmar, I think they're just repurposed Warhammer Fantasy models. Like I've got some Marauders and some Chaos Warriors, and they stick them on round bases now and sell them for Age of Sigmar. So a lot, well, maybe not a lot of the stuff, but some of the stuff is like as old Warhammer stock, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of it is. A lot of the stuff that they kind of already had in plastic, I think, for Warhammer. I think that seemed to be what made the cut as to what survived at Age of Sigmar. Do they have a plastic kit for it? Yeah, then you can still get it. But
what do you think would happen if I turned up to the shop with like loads of the monopose high elves from 4th edition, just put them down? Do you think that'd be okay, or do you want me to?
I think so. That'd be fat. That
get away with that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
as long as they're painted all right.
It'd be hard to know who was who though, because they're all the same.
Yeah.
Did you paint a few of the high elves in your day? Those monopose classics.
Yeah, I did. Although it was orcs and goblins for me, so it's mostly the goblins. I'd not like trade the high elves or give away to someone else, and it was just the monopose goblins and the spears and the bows. Like, yeah, hundreds of them.
And then the Gretchen for 40k.
Oh
painted a few of them too.
Yeah.
What are do you have any models these days that are super rare in your collection? Stuff you wouldn't part with.
Stuff I have a ridiculously big collection of stuff. A lot of things that I wouldn't part with. Yeah, I really got into collecting the trolls in like 8th edition. I was like trying to go back and try and get like pretty much every Games Workshop troll that they'd ever made and things. So I got most of them. So some of them, I think I've got like one of the old Blood Bowl ones who's really rare and really obscure and stuff. So he's pretty cool. And yeah, I wouldn't really want to part with any of the old metal ones that I've painted. So
I had the troll for Blood Bowl. I had a box of Blood Bowl with that troll. With a full painted Chaos team, and my mum chucked them out. Just put them in the bin, whole thing. And she put my 40k box. I had the Gazgul, I think his name was. Wee standard bearer. I had him. I had quite a lot of characters for back then. A lot of fancy wee Space Marines and stuff that went in the bin too. Should be thinking she's thrown out some, snakes and ladders. Like, just chuck that out, chuck this out too. And looking back, I'm like, Mum, it's probably worth quite a lot of money.
Mum, look on eBay, these guys you threw out, see what they're going for, yeah.
Aye. I've heard stories of guys that make it explicitly clear to their partners that, look, see if I get killed in like a car crash, this stuff is worth a lot of money. Like, don't just ask somebody to come and like clear the room. Like, find somebody who knows what they're doing and make sure you get some money for it.
It's a fair point, I guess. Yeah. The second-hand market is kind of crazy. Sometimes models are worth or seem to go for very little, and then sometimes you see them being listed for crazy amounts. And
on a previous episode, one of the things that come up was it's worth nipping into your Oxfams, your Sue Riders and stuff like that, because you just don't know what might be in there. Like, people like my mum, maybe they don't throw stuff out, maybe they go and just hand it in there and it sits. It's like 50 pence for a very rare tome or box of models or that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, you just never know. Or rogue trader army or something like that turns up. Yeah.
So where just getting things wrapped up, Joe, it's been a really good wee chat. Where can the listener, if they're interested in checking out Warpack, where could they go and do that and get involved?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment the only place is to follow my Patreon. Just Joe Prince on Patreon. Joe J Prince on Patreon, and you can follow me on Twitter as well. But for now, Patreon's the best place, and I'll keep updated with news on there. Watch this space. I'm hoping to reach more people soon. But it's been great. It's been like a recent kind of flurry of activity, just getting this done and kind of getting motivated again, getting back into it. So.
Thanks very much for listening to this episode of the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. For show notes, subscribe links, and info about how to appear as a guest on a future episode, go to bedroombattlefields.com/podcast.